Pleasant good morning to everyone. My name is Nneka St, and I am the chair of the Department of Social and Behavioural Sciences here at COSTAATT, and I am your host and moderator for this morning's insightful discussion on neurodiversity. To our in-person attendees, I want to wish you a warm welcome to our COSTAATT City Campus location and to our viewing and listening audience online as well. We're honored to welcome you to this engaging and thought-provoking panel discussion on neurodiversity hosted by COSTAATT's Department of Education and Social and Behavioural Sciences. Today's event brings together leaders, professionals, and lived experience advocates from across education, health, and community sectors to share their unique insights on neurodiversity. Through meaningful dialogue, we hope to inspire more inclusive practices and policies that empower all individuals to thrive. Annually, Neurodiversity Week is celebrated in March, specifically the 17th to the 23rd, and it encourages schools, workplaces, and communities to celebrate the talents and strengths of neurodivergent individuals, and most importantly, challenge misconceptions. This discussion is the first of a series of intentional and specific discussions around the topic, helping a cross-section of persons to better understand, appreciate, and advocate. So look out for more to come. I also invite our in-person attendees to view the display put on by our early childhood education students in instructional strategies for students with disabilities upon completion of our discussion. I would like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. And I'll probably have the panelists show their hands as I call out to them so that you can know who is who. We have Ms. Brianna Bedeau, who is the director of Everest Development Center. Brianna has dedicated over 15 years to providing academic support. Her journey began at a homework center in Levantil, where she recognized the importance of understanding children's thought processes and the root cause of learning disorders. At the University of the West, followed by a master's in development disorders and clinical practice at the University of York. Brianna is certified by the British Psychological Society in educational testing. Managing a homework center and evaluating children has exposed her to various learning disorders and a firm understanding of our local education system. Brianna's dedication to child development has led to the creation of impactful educational programs that address both academic and emotional needs, fostering growth and success for students. Let's give a warm welcome to Ms. Brianna. Next to Ms. Bedeau, we have Mrs. Chevon Cupidore Cricky. Mrs. Cupidore Cricky, is a senior school social worker at the St. George East Educational District with 9 years of experience working at the Ministry of Education Student Support Services Division in Trinidad and Tobago, serving both primary and secondary schools. She is a wife and a mother of 3 children, one in which is diagnosed with autism. She holds a BSc in social work with first-class honors and is currently completing her master's in the same field. Chevon also holds certifications in theater arts, project management, and play therapy. Passionate about youth empowerment, she actively mentors young people and supports community development initiatives in Central Trinidad. We thank you for joining us this morning, actually. Following Chevon, we have Mrs. Tonya Greaves. Tonya is a dynamic clinician, educator, and trauma specialist whose work bridges compassion and clinical excellence. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology with honors from UWI St. Augustine, a Master's of Science in Counseling Psychology with a distinction from UWI Cape Hill, and is currently a Psych D candidate in psychology with clinical specialization at California Southern University. Certified as a compassion fatigue therapist, field traumatologist, and compassion fatigue educator through the Green Cross Academy of Traumatology. Tonya also holds advanced certification in ADHD, knowledge she applies both professionally and personally, as a dedicated parent to a neurodivergent child. Based in the Turks and Caicos Islands, Tonya serves under the Ministry of Health and Human Services, providing therapeutic interventions to children, adults, and forensic populations. With over a decade of academic experience, she is currently part of the adjunct faculty, teaching in research and psychology at UWI Global Campus and COSTAATT for 12 and 11 years, respectively. Tonya is known for her ability to combine empirical rigor with deep empathy, creating transformative spaces for healing, growth, and empowerment across clinical, academic, and community settings. Let's give Mrs. Greaves a very nice one. Next, we have Mr. Jeremy Francis. Jeremy is an organizational development specialist based in Trinidad and Tobago with over 15 years of experience in the field. He uses international benchmarks and networks to provide training and services in assessment and development centers, psychometric assessments, coaching, and general HR consulting. As an OD practitioner, he works with companies on medium to long-term projects and has technical experience in developing, performance management, and learning and development systems and processes. Psychometric assessments, assessment centers, coaching, and management and development are core components of his work. He has authored 3 books on HR-related topics and presented his work at local and international conferences. Jeremy is also currently pursuing a PhD in psychology at the University of the West Indies, focusing on neurodiversity at work. Let's give Mr. Francis. Dr. Radica Mahase is a historian, educator, and social advocate. She's a senior lecturer in history at COSTAATT, the founder of Support Autism TNT, an NGO that creates opportunities for persons on the autism spectrum. She is the director of Rahul's Clubhouse and Autism Center in San Fernando. She is also a weekly columnist with the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian, writing on education and social issues. In recognition of her contribution, she was awarded the Chevon Medal, Silver, for service in education, volunteerism, and advocacy. Please let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Radica. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Shinelle Smith. Ms. Shinelle Jamie Smith holds the esteemed position of Chair of Education at the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago, COSTAATT. Possessing a distinguished educational background, Mrs. Smith's credentials include a Bachelor of Science in Hospitality and Tourism, a Master of Science in Tourism Development and Management, a Master of Science in Innovation, Management and Entrepreneurship, a Master of Arts in Digital Teaching and Learning, a Professional Certificate in University Teaching, a CELTA certificate from University of Cambridge. She is also the recipient of the prestigious Chevon.
The elections to our students. I don't have any intentions of using it to oppose. Thank you.
At the University of Nottingham. Foremost, Ms. a consultant, and administrator. Her illustrious career spans a spectrum of impactful roles. Over the past 15 years, largely as facilitator of course design on the street and the forum of academic
training and YTRC.
It's about education more accessible via virtual delivery, particularly for neurodivergent learners and women in rural communities. So, as you see sitting here in front of you, we have a distinguished, I would say, an esteemed, diverse group of panelists this morning who's definitely going to bring to the fore and help us understand or better understand neurodiversity from the various spheres that they come from. The format of today's discussion will engage the panelists in conversation around the topic of neurodiversity. We've allocated 10 to 15 minutes at the end to allow for any questions that you may have for our esteemed panelists. For online participants, please feel free to type your questions in the chat. So this morning, I am actually doubling over as both your hostess and your moderator. So I'm switching my hat. Okay, so let's jump right into it. And this is an open question, of course, to all the panelists. Can you tell me, I'm starting with the most basic conversation or the most basic question. What is neurodiversity, and specifically, what does neurodiversity mean for you in your sphere of influence? And more than that, why do you think it's important for us to have a conversation now, here, today, in our local context about neurodiversity? Yes, that was a mouthful. And so I'm going to give you about 2 seconds to think it through. So what is neurodiversity for you in your sphere of influence, and why is it important?
So good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm so happy that COSTAATT is taking the initiative in doing this panel discussion. So the simplest, easiest, most direct way I explain neurodiversity is basically that everyone's brain develops in its own unique way. So before we used to refer to people as normal and abnormal in terms of development, in terms of brain development. But when we start using the word neurodiversity, we are seeing that everyone is capable of doing something in his or her own unique way. Okay? That's the simplest version I can come up with. Everybody can answer.
Good morning again, everyone. So how I would sort of neurodiversity for me, it is the celebration of being weird. The acknowledgement that being different is actually quite normal and should be accepted. Because for a lot of people, a lot of young people went to school, people are excluded because they don't fit into what they get expected to know. And as a result of that, people suffer a lot. Go to school, go to the place. So being that experienced in myself, I understand fully what it means to be different and to be something outside of it. So neurodiversity for me is celebrating the fact that I could be different and I could be accepted, and that everyone else has the ability to do the same and could craft a society that supports us being different, supports kids being different, and supports our kids that allow us to that kind of education.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you. For me, when I think about what neurodiversity represents, foremost, what comes to my mind is the way we process information. And technically speaking, the neurodiverse mind, there are a range of options in terms of how that processing happens. I have ADHD, and I was late diagnosed with that. And it took me a very long time to really try to appreciate exactly how information ought to be interpreted, how the output ought to be delivered even. And foremost, like somebody mentioned, having a forum like this, the significance of it is really to shed light, not just on the negative connotations with neurodiversity, but also as well how we can assist how people are still able to be high functioning with a diagnosis of the same.
Good morning. All right, so I agree with everything that was said. When I have an opportunity to talk about neurodiversity, I'm so happy that I have another panelist who was late diagnosed. I also have ADHD. So I was diagnosed because my son was diagnosed. And in that process, we realized that we are a special family. But I find that very often when we have this conversation, there is this propensity that we have to categorize us as neurodivergent and not non-neurodivergent. But do you know that neurodiversity actually is an all-inclusive term? Because even you who don't have a diagnosis are neurodivergent. If you think about it, everyone learns differently. Some people are visual, some people are read-write, some people are kinesthetic. That's neurodiversity as well. All right. So agreeing with everything that was said before, particularly the awareness, I like that you said, Because I, throughout my life, I couldn't understand why, I mean, I was just strange, you know, I would do strange things. And I couldn't get it. There was not a space for me, I was just weird. But now I understand more. And I feel like the term was coined because we want to get away from looking at it as pathology. It's really just that your brain develops differently, you process things differently, you learn things differently, you're unique. And yeah, that's my 2 cents. So, what neurodiversity is and what it means to me.
Thank you. So I think I want to ask maybe Chevon and Brianna to probably tell us, because I think we've definitely gotten a lovely picture of what neurodiversity is. To probably tell us, why is it important for us to be discussing neurodiversity now in this local context? Why is it critical for us to have these discussions?
So hi everyone, good morning again. And yes, indeed it is critical for us to have this discussion now. I would see it from the lens of working in the school system for many years. We found silence around this topic. All right, I mean, in the Caribbean context, I would have experienced specific adults saying, I was not hired to teach abnormal children, normal children. Why is you social workers always advocating for us to implement this and to do this, but I was not trained to treat with them. So you are bringing an IEP and you're bringing suggestions of things that I can do in the classroom setting for this child. Then when I went to school to get my bachelor's in education, this was not really the focus. So it's important for professional development to occur throughout the lifespan, as I can speak just in the educational setting, for those persons that are working with our children who are on this neurodivergent, and to not just put labels on them to say if they're neurodivergent, I can't have them in my class. But no, we can have inclusive education. And we can think about ways that what inclusive education looks like in the 21st century, looks like in our classrooms now. We talk about mainstream schooling, and we think about creating different strategies for our children to attain education. But I think right now, sensitization and awareness is critical for persons to see the value in accepting these children in their spaces. And the way we can really get them in their spaces and create persons to advocate for them, encourage persons to work with them, but really educating them and starting this. And I believe this is an excellent platform for those onlookers to really be a part of in creating this space to have this discussion about neurodiversity.
I think with anything, in order for change to occur, education has to occur. The more people that have an understanding of what's happening and how brains work and how things work, it allows for application, not just on a public setting, but within the kitchen, within a family member saying, I think this is something that you need to consider. I think within the Caribbean context, the reality of how we term neurodivergence is, or any difference or any challenge a child may have, is, well, they just need some links. They probably don't have enough discipline. They're probably just lazy. And one of the things that I always have to point out to parents is that children don't like to feel, particularly at a small age, they don't like to feel the feeling of failure. And when in a school system where it's constantly faced with some of those challenges and you're constantly being provided with terms of lazy and in developmental challenges, you have the aspect of phobia and you need to go and do this level of support. What happens is that because we do not have a proper system of understanding how brains work, we also have the reality of we're not going to get the level of support that this level of brain needs in this environment. We have the reality of the failed labeling that occurs. Oftentimes, we do not have the level, children do not get the support that they need because the parent says, I can do it on my own, I can figure out what this is. But as I always say, if you have a headache versus a brain tumor, in the sense of taking Panadol for the pain that you have, it's not going to be effective, and you want to provide the effective support. So as much as we want to run away from labeling, understanding how these types of behaviors, what challenges are occurring, allows for the tailored support that is needed. But the education of celebrating of, okay, well, we just need to figure out how this brain works so that we can then provide the level of support and systems that need to be built in place allows for the context or the boat to start moving. So in terms of just your here being able to advocate for somebody else when a family member comes and says, I don't know what's going on with them, they're just lazy, they don't know how to organize their work, they're just disorganized. I can just take away everything from them and then, you get to say, well, have you looked at the different skills or support that they would need? Have you sat down and read with them and figured out which method of approach works best for them? What level of support are you all implicating at home that may allow for the waters and the currents to change? So within the Caribbean context, running away from the quick fixes of licks and quick labeling of lazy would allow for the different types of brains to get the level of support that they need.
I want to sure.
Okay.
Another thing that I have realized about the conversation about neurodiversity is that it always includes the younger generation because there's always diagnosis in early childhood, and truthfully, I feel as if there is more support and understanding for the younger ones. One of the things I believe about why a conversation like this is important is that we need to understand that because information like this was not available when we were younger, and a lot of us went under the radar and were not diagnosed, and now we're diagnosed in our adulthood, there needs to be support for us in the workplace, which is not a conversation that is happening at all, all right? We have an employee who comes to work late a lot. For ADHD, for persons who have ADHD, time blindness is actually one of a very big, what would I want to call it, like a symptom? It's something that we experience, right? And so instead of penalizing that employee for coming to work late, if we understood that they were neurodivergent, and we put in a system like flexi time to allow them to operate when it was best for them, we find that there is support, but there is no conversation really happening. And I'm hoping that forums like this would start as a catalyst for us thinking about how we can support those when undiagnosed, who are still productive, masking.
Yes.
We do good at that.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask because right in the talking mic, I was about to talk about the fact that we often hear the discussion of neurodivergent centered around children, and I wanted to tap into how does neurodivergence play itself out in adults. And maybe I want to ask Jeremy, who I probably say is the expert on the panel, to talk about neurodivergence in play. I saw it.
So, all right, so this is my words on that. On top of the code. I have in my private practice, so I group of companies, members, and the state is what it is, more than development. But in terms of developing procedural policies and so on, but also performance management systems and frameworks. One of my clients, he had a little bit of the managing director of a corporate company, and he was diagnosed with ADHD about 2 years ago. He is 54. When I worked with that company for about 12 years, when you look back at the issues that company have, it has diverged family from how you manage it. When most people were saying things quite standardly. And you look at him, he was a sort of somebody that time keeping, was writing things down, just forgetting that he told someone to do something, and it was a lot of organizational structure. So of course I am getting that help. But the diagnosis of ADHD was some sense of therapy, and then with therapy and so on, he was able to focus himself a little bit more. The issues are still there, but at least there's an acknowledgement. And a lot of the conversations we have, as we said about him, but you don't grow out of your neurodivergent. You're a kid, then you become an adult. You have to work. And it is at that point that you come to me, right? So I have over the years had to deal with a number of employee situations, disciplinary. And at the stem of it, it's either the employee is neurodivergent and parasitic, and so on, or we have a family member that is neurodivergent. And that in itself was a lot of stress for them, because apart from having to come to work and manage whatever's happening in the office, they have to go home and deal with the stress of dealing with a family member that needs some extra care. So there's a lot in which we are really to unpack, but the more important thing is, and coming back on to your point, it isn't really even about ADHD or autism. It is about recognizing we are all neurodivergent. We all do things differently, and we have to unplug ourselves from this notion of normal. It is actually more normal to be different. And we have developed a word that makes normal seem the thing that we all need to work towards and fit into. And we can flip that around because we are causing a lot of stress and damage and emotional stress to people by making them feel that they have to fit into something that literally does not exist. Right? So we need to start understanding and getting accustomed to the fact that being different needs to be discussed. It does not need to be pathologized. And we need to appreciate that having a conversation about doing things differently needs to become,
Thank you. So, we have one thing.
Just to add to what you're saying, just thinking about the person who was at 54 and late diagnosed, again, brings him recognizing and understanding what is happening, because I'm sure he would have felt like, oh gosh, why always this way and why always that way? Recognizing or having somebody sit down with him and say, these are the errors that are most likely to occur with your type of brain, and here are these systems that you need to build in order to support yourself and those around you. So him recognizing that, okay, my brain is a little bit scattered, and you get lost into one project and not recognize the other aspects of finance, the other aspects of this need to be addressed. But I'm very good at doing this job because I get zoned in. Recognizing that, okay, I'm going to have a tendency to zone in. So we need to have a sit down discussion of the person who's going to be my admin to pay attention to my fine details. I'm going to be excellent at the gist. I'm going to be excellent at the aspect of coming up with the ideas that other people will not be able to come up with the ideas with, but I'm going to need a really strong admin support. Who's going to sit next to me and say, you didn't consider this factor, let's dive into this factor and get into the weeds. So it also goes back into, yes, celebrating neurodivergence, but understanding how your brain works at its core. Even as an adult, having discussions and like you say, let's not understand what the ADHD brain looks like, what are some of the errors that are prone to occur, and what are the systems that most people have put in place that has worked, so that people go, yeah, that is me. Okay, well, that's happened to me all the time. And what do you do to fix it? Okay, or manage it. Okay, so we need the system. So understanding again is at the core of the level of support that is needed.
Yeah, and I definitely think that it is important for persons to probably understand, okay, what are some of the things, if as an adult, that I may be doing that may lead me to think I perhaps need to be tested, or what are some of the things I'm noticing in the child that I'm caring for that makes me feel I need to be tested. So I think that's some of the things I would also like to get out of the panelists today. What are some of the identifiers? What are some of the things that we're looking for? How does it play itself out in the workplace? We heard about, having issues with being on time, being on task. How does it play itself out in the school system for children? Do they present itself very differently? So that's also something we would want to cover or get into a little bit more in depth as we go through the discussion.
For me, I think it was a bit of a awakening. My situation was a bit different in the sense that I was actively doing research
on neurodiversity, and throughout that research, kind of stumbled upon a lot of things that resonated with me. That led to a lot of a rabbit hole, I would say, probably about 6 months of intensive research, conferences, consultations. But there were some really core characteristics, and I tend not to lump together characteristics under labels, like somebody mentioned, particularly because it's so diverse in terms of what can happen and how that processing takes place. For me, I think one of the largest markers was the need for clarity and context. Information will be presented in a group setting, and I will have a lot of difficulty in terms of dissecting what exactly is being asked of me. I will approach management or anytime even my lecturers, and I will say, okay, can you rephrase this? I'm a bit unclear. And the ability to start anything that appeared to be somewhat ambiguous was almost daunting and overwhelming. But again, I'm choosing to be very keen on talking about your recommendations or the positive side of that reality check for me. And as an adult who was late diagnosed, what I did in fact realize, parallel to me finding out about this, I was also very much studying things regarding technology and digital teaching and learning. So it created a space where I was able, side by side, to appreciate the impact that technology had in terms of supporting or counteracting some of these very challenges. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing to look at when we think about teaching pedagogy as well as a workplace environment. Somebody mentioned accommodations for adult learners or adult workers even. And that's a discussion too that I think we need to really start tapping into. There have been so many advances within the last 2-3 years as it relates to accommodations for neurodiversity. And there's still a lot of awareness challenges, sensitization, employers being aware of what can in fact be incorporated. But there are tons of resources that I think personally that I use and I'm very much aware can in fact help the mapping and the processing of that type of.
Thank you, Shinelle. So Shinelle has spoken about technology as one of those strategies that can be applied to create a much more neuro-friendly or neuro-inclusive environment. Can any of you panelists share with us perhaps some strategies within your spheres of influence that have been applied, that you've seen successfully applied to create that type of neuro-inclusive environment? One that celebrates the awareness that
you want more? Okay, I'll go and get more.
This one.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add, last year we had a particular school developed a council.
I'm gonna get more. All right, I'm gonna get more. Just so I'm tired. We cannot lie down on the bed like this.
Concepts from play therapy, exploring social and emotional learning skills, and created a space for students in their library to go in whenever they felt overstimulated. Even if they weren't, again, we're not talking about that, we're thinking about just any child in the school could go to the librarian and inform them that they would like to have a session in the camp space, but the camp space would have been tailored to their needs of more or less the neurodivergent person. So there were activities in terms of art, play, instruments to help them texture this very sensory base so that they were able to accommodate them. So when the child, again, I can speak for the child because that's my space. So the child would have felt a trigger in school. The child could have gone into this space and de-stress, regulate him or herself, and then go into the classroom. The principal found this that would have decreased behavioral infractions at the school level. It would have found children felt more comfortable going to the social worker or guidance officer following that time alone in their space. And they would have now been able to engage in that level of emotional regulation. So we found that too, school supervisors were on board and they applauded the students for taking this initiative. And they are not by a teacher. And the teacher would have been exposed to this level of training and the professional development, brought it back to the school, sharing knowledge with her staff, and everyone came on board. So that's a strategy that we would have seen outside of the regular social workers, special educators that are there in the school system to work with children and work with them, those that are referred to us. We found that the school took initiative outside of the normal to create, this is no taboo around it. It's normal, everyone can access the service. And we found that to be accommodating to the students and their needs. So that was one strategy. So we could have employed the school for.
So So one of the things that we have in support of Autism TNT, we run around Clubhouse. It's an autism friendly space, but we also have children with ADHD. Most of the autistic children we have also have ADHD. We have a couple of children with Down syndrome as well. So we developed a specific way, a specific model. I actually named the model, it's the Mahase model. It was developed in consultation with both local, regional, and international consultation with persons who worked as educators, therapists, you name it. And it came out of a lot of research. And what we have done is we try to approach it as a holistic thing. So we don't, most of the therapists in Trinidad, they work individually. You'll be running with your child from speech therapy to occupational therapy to behavioral therapy. It adds up, it costs a lot. Many parents that at the end of the day, they have to choose between which one they can afford. So what we have done is the Mahase model focused on treating all in a holistic manner. So each session the child is engaged in, we encompass different aspects of it. If the child comes in and it's a predominantly non-verbal child, and we know that we need to focus on speech, but at the same time, that child is supposed to be at a certain level in terms of academic, we will include the academic within the speech therapy. If a child comes in with behavioral issues, as we see with the older kids, once they hit puberty, we start to see all the behavioral issues coming up. Then we need to treat with the behavior before we can help them with the occupational or with the academics and so on. So we do that. We treat it in a holistic manner and it's tailored specifically to the individual child. So we have some children who are in schools, both public and private schools, but they're lost within the system. Because within the system, they can't sit at a desk from 8:30 to 2:30. You know, teachers don't understand that if they don't have that focus, it's not because they are behaving badly or they don't see hair or all these things that we call them. You know, it's not that they need some licks to straighten them out as some of the parents believe. So what we do is we focus on the individual's, the child's strength, and we build on that strength while trying to help them with the challenges. Now, we have to be open and we have to accept the fact that that is not something that we can really do within the public school system. Not when a teacher has 25 to 30 children in a classroom. So that kind of individual support that we see being very successful at Ralph's Clubhouse is something that I think could be used to support children who are within the public and the private school system, to just help them keep up, to keep pace, to be able to, you know, do what we want them to do, build on their strengths. That is something that, you know, I'm hoping that discussions like this would really lead to eventually, because that is where we go as a society, as a country.
My role as a founding director of the Neurodiversity Public Foundation in Trinidad, I go around the companies and I consult with management and staff. So the two things that I encourage staff within their company. One comes from the point of the playroom. But what I would say is most companies have an 8, right, or 16. I have told them you can recruit them. So if you have an employee who is motivated or something, and if you allow them the ability to go and use that room, sit down themselves, and then pick up the line down for 15, 20 minutes, calm themselves. So you don't have to create an additional space. You can do one. But you can also use what you have. You have an office at the empty that the one is using, we will process for that purpose. The second thing I told them is noise cancelling headphones are amazing, right? So you can either allow employees to use them or create an environment where, because many times noise for neurodivergent person is not real history, right? It really is. And sometimes it is as simple as creating a quiet space or allowing them to be in this space, but in quiet by putting on the headphones allows them to focus and help. So those are two things that I have done. Those are things that I have done even in my own practice with my class as well. That we really can do.
So I'm also curious to know that these are some fantastic strategies, but what are the barriers that you've encountered to really being able to implement it, as Radica said, on a wider scale? For Jeremy, for instance, what has the reception been? How receptive are organizations to one accepting that they have neurodiverse employees and then saying, okay, well, sick bay is no longer just a place where we put a bed and if people get sick, we put them there, but we're creating a space that actually celebrates some of our employees that may need that type of space. What's the level of reception in a space like Trinidad and Tobago?
Right, so the first thing for organizations is they think that this accommodation conversation is an expensive one. That seems to be the first thing. And I've always told people that doing nothing is actually doing something. So for some people, you make an active decision not to do something, that is a decision not made, right? And I need everyone to understand that, right? And a lot of companies feel that that is the decision that they will make. I am going to do nothing because this sounds like trouble, right? So the first conversation I have with them is a lot of your accommodations that are required for this are free. And they actually include you understanding your employees and your customers. And just being aware that people are different and being more accommodating is really that. So the issue of the employee that's probably coming to the plate, instead of sending them like HR, you have a conversation about things that could be done to help them in collaboration with their co-workers about what could be done. This is not to support quote-unquote laziness, because there are some people who are just lazy. We are talking about someone who is clinically diagnosed has an issue, and that the organization is willing to have a conversation with them about what could be done for them. Noise cancelling headphones might cost you a couple $100 US if it was a fancy one. But they are cheap ones. And most employees may want to have their own. The issue though is about whether I can wear headphones at work, which to me is ludicrous. Because so what? You think I'm listening to Marcel, what? The work is getting done. And this is the issue. So part of it is money. The other part is I need to control what you are doing when you are here. I need to see you. I need to make sure you're focused on what is going on in front of you here. And anything that distracts from that is a problem. So my thought is really difficult from that perspective. You fight against one, that's on your expenses, and two, how does this impact the bottom line in terms of distracting my people? And I'll add the third one. If I give Dean an accommodation, I have to give it to everybody. But again, this is part of the conversation that you need to have and some of the barriers you need to bring on.
I just want to add to that I think one of the biggest barriers is mentality. You know, we still live in a society where we think that once you have some kind of differences, something is wrong with you and therefore you cannot be productive and therefore you cannot, you cannot really make an impact in any way. And one of the things that I have done, that we have been doing for a while now, Autism TNT, is autism sensitization seminars for companies, for businesses. And one of the general things that we get when we talk about, creating small sensory rules or giving small concessions to workers, or even to employees who have children who are neurodivergent, who might need a little extra time to take a child to therapy and so on. The most outstanding one that I come across is, but how we know they're really saying that is the problem. And Trini's don't really make it, well, Trinbagonians don't really make it easier, because as you said, the minute you give concessions to one, everybody will jump on and say, well, he getting free time, so therefore I can find a way to get free time. Yes. So that whole mentality and the stigma that we have around neurodiversity, that is the biggest barrier that we have to overcome before we can really see any kind of, deep impact in our country.
I would also like to add that this is from the education standpoint.
when you've been a lecturer or teacher for a number of years, it's particularly difficult for you to change your way and your approach to pedagogy. You have very much rooted in your mind what is a successful format for how a class should go, how assessment should be. And that is a huge issue, even with any faculty spaces, where we need to start having conversations about how do you now think about adapting your assessments to make it more accessible. What about the fact that you can't upload a printed hard copy or written note because it's not accessible to the end user who may have dyslexia? So there are very simple design elements that could make the world of a difference to adult learners. Getting faculty on board to understand the significance and the approach is also necessary and also going to be a bit of a daunting challenge. For me, I think looking at the UK context, where a lot of these accommodations are in fact written within their law, that legal framework, it doesn't really give much wiggle room. Accessibility is at the fore, these are the things that you have to do. And going back to this, looking at instructional design in a very general way, I think one of my favorite discussions around it is simply as educators, when we are thinking about neurodivergence in education, it's not about preparing material for neurodivergent students. It's really about preparing material that everyone can access, and should you fall within that bracket, you can benefit from the realities of the exchange systems.
Thank you. And so on. I also wanted to ask from the school perspective, so maybe Chevon and Brianna can weigh in on this. What, in terms of, once we get to the point, because a lot of the panelists have spoken about licks in our culture being the go-to when the children, for instance, are, showing behaviors that may not be normal, right? Or what we consider to be normal. What are some of the misconceptions about assessment? Getting to that point of saying, okay, I'm ready to have my child assessed, somebody who's under my care assessed. What are the misconceptions? And not only what are the misconceptions, but then how is it received in the school setting once the assessment is done and has revealed that there is some sort of neurodivergence?
Okay, so generally before a parent comes to an assessment, because of the cultural perspective that we have, you find that it's, well, I had an inclination, but I wanted to wait and see. So we have a lot of a wait and see approach, but I've tried everything else possible. So now I really know that I don't know, and I want to find out. So that's usually what happens by the time they get to the office. I've tried everything. I did lessons, I do this, I went on YouTube, I did that. Now I really don't know. So it has to be that I'm missing something, and I really want to find a piece of the puzzle. So in terms of the evaluation, that's generally the kind of pattern, the approach that parents would have when they get to the office. Once they do the evaluation and they understand, oh, this is how their brain works, these are some of the challenges and barriers that I have implemented within the home. So some of the things that I need to change as well. As stated, it's not always translated within the classroom, because the classrooms, private, public, they have too many things going on. The teachers, they have too many things going on, even when you present the case to the school and you present it to the teacher, even the teacher that's like, okay, I now understand this child, it's not necessarily going to translate into a change in teaching style or a change in how they do exams. They usually just kind of say, well, they get some extra time and you get an extra room, but it's not necessarily always translated into the classroom. So therein, the additional support of after-school care programs, remedial programs, different therapies are what are often the support to children, because they're not going to get it in the classroom right now. That's the context or the reality of it, even in the most prestigious private schools, because they in their own selves are trying to maintain a particular standards, push out their own agendas, and it's not necessarily tailored to anybody who would need a variation of support. So what you find is that parents often have to go and get the persons to run alongside the school to provide the support within the classroom. Now, the challenge that I find with that is that money does not grow on trees. And the reality is two things. Money doesn't grow on trees, and then time. So as a working parent, you would have all of the intentions of supporting your child, but then you have a full work day. You still have to feed the child. You still have to check the homework. You still have to pack the lunch kits. You still have to deal with the other children and the other needs that are constantly at battle. So I think whereas in the past, the only barrier to entry to support was finances, with mothers being so heavily in the workforce, and fathers, and even grannies, because grannies used to be an additional support. Grannies still working. The time factor that a child may need for persons to invest in them, to sit and do the homework, to have the patience and capacity to even tailor it for that child, it's often not there. Leaving both parents feeling frustrated and overwhelmed, mothers feeling guilty, and then it shows up in a different level of patience that they may have for the child. So yeah, so there's a plethora of challenges that come with needing additional support, and time and money being one of those two barriers.
Right, so for Ministry of Education, a child comes to school, they have to start in child care, goes into primary to secondary. At early childhood care level, we do not have student support services officers assigned. They get to pick up, as we say, early detection, early assessments. But at the primary school, once they hit at primary school, we're gonna get the teacher-parent relation gonna happen. Every minute, come for your child. The child's not sitting down, the child's not having lunch, the child's not following the routine of the school. So there we will have indicators. You have your SSS, the personnel attached to the school. So they will go through a system called a school-based intervention, where the person sit down, begin to come up with strategies for this child, and realize that you need to make some accommodations to parent conferences and etc. If that doesn't work, the child is now referred. A document is sent to student support services requesting that this child gets seen by school social worker, guidance, clinical psychologist, special educator, school psychologist, or behavioral specialist. You all are the experts, you decide where this case will go. So we sit down, we deliberate on these cases, and we assign someone to attach. Most times the social worker gets in, all right, that's where my forte is in, because we have the special educator and the school social worker working together. Or social worker goes at home to get home assessments, figure out what's happening at the home and family level. A lot of psychoeducation occurs to now bring this parent into the sense that probably we need to get this child assessed if needs be. But we don't diagnose, we cannot diagnose, so we just make recommendations while the special educator engage in assessment tools to again build up a good package, but to get a psych ed done by our clinical psychologists. Mind you, we have one clinical psychologist per district, one social worker per 3 schools. Now we have a 1-to-1 ratio in some selected schools. So think about the timeline for intervention. So the timeline is not this. So this is not, it's not easy on paper, right? The process chain is easy there. And then monitoring and evaluation of cases assigned to officers to ensure it's best practice. We find that again, we would have some challenges there. Officers do work and try their best in terms of the public, as I'm speaking from the public sector. So can I speak my work? We work hard, okay? So we work hard, but in reality, we do not have the manpower, all right? We do not have the manpower enough to service, and we would have found teachers saying 3/4 of their classroom, something wrong with these children, right? We don't know what to do, miss, so you all need to help us because it's the entire class. And then we have aids. So as you mentioned, a child might be PSS. Clinical psychologists may bring a report to develop an individualized educational plan, speak to the teacher to implement these strategies, and an aid is assigned to this child. We have aids at primary OGs. When OGT contracts come to an end, this leaves termination happens. And you think about a neurodivergent child just having to get up one day and realize, my aid gone, and I'm by myself in this class. Think about what that looks like for this child, the trauma for that child. And we have to also understand that that's where social workers also get involved. that these children go through the same social issues that like a neurotypical child. So they in the same family environment, divorce, separation, grief and loss, puberty, all these challenges that we all talk about for a normal child, they go through that in addition to having to case manage, interact with their different care providers and navigate through the system. So that's why I love Ms. Mahase's model in terms of trying to find like there's another one-stop shop, but you really to manage the amount of interactions with so many different care providers, you take it about the psychological facility of the child to really reduce and do no harm. Yeah, so that is where we speak about Ministry of Education, and we do make accommodations, but you can understand clearly manpower is a big factor.
Tonya, I wanted to ask you from your perspective, I know you operate in a context outside of Trinidad, if there's been any strategies that you have implemented or you've seen implemented that you think can be applied in our space.
Right. So, yeah, I'm just trying to find a good way to say it. So everybody is strapped for resources, right? So, in another Caribbean context, nothing changes, right? We have a special needs section in our Ministry of Education that would deal with that, but we have one of everybody. And where we are, it is 40 islands, but it's broken up into districts. And that one person is serving everybody. So again, we have the timeline for intervention being immediate. All right. Now, I did say that my son is neurodiverse. He was diagnosed with ADHD, but he is dually diagnosed because he also has dyspraxia, which is coordination issue, right? Right. So we get intervention from the UK. Sometimes we have visiting teams that would come and assist with interventions. But again, once their time is done, that intervention is taken away and there is nothing to fill it in. All right. I work with the behavioral health services. Unfortunately, the only thing that our department can do is support parents. And I am not taking that as anything light because I believe parents need support. If we have heard about from our two panelists before about the pressure that parents face in terms of competing commitments, I think that parents need to understand how important support is, and even having a space where they can ventilate. That's important. That's important for establishing and maintaining good mental health. Imagine having to have someone who doesn't speak the language, that you are trying to explain what is happening within your context, with your child, with work. They probably, and this I find is a very big issue. With neurodiversity, it's a little bit different for people who are differently able physically, because it is seen as an invisible disability. And so very often, and I have had this experience, people think that the child is pretending. Yep. The child is not right? So just very, very quickly, I had the experience of having a teacher say to me, oh, Jesus. That okay, so we don't have AIDS. We don't have a context for that. So what I would do is he has an issue completing tasks on time. And even though I am doing medication management too, because unfortunately I have gotten to that stage. I believe that medication management is needed. So he is taking his meds, but his meds only last so long. And there are other strategies during the day that need to be implemented to keep him on task and to keep him focused that nobody gets. Right. So I would have been told So I'm a parent, I understand that you have a class of all these students and you cannot possibly do all of the things that I would have been asking you to do to support him. I don't have a problem, I'll support him. And because his difference is invisible in his mind, and he is performing well, I've been told things like, I'm gonna erase the board. I'm gonna erase the board. I am coming to the class to assist. I will have him, whatever he doesn't do in class, miss, don't worry about it. You just leave it and I will do that. I will come to the class, I will take it, and I've even availed myself if he has meltdowns during the day. Because another thing that we haven't discussed this morning is the fact that running comorbid with neurodiversity are mental health issues like anxiety.
Yeah.
And that's because of the societal pressure that is placed on these children when they realize that they're unable to live up to the demands that society has placed on them. So he definitely has anxiety as well. So he will have meltdowns during the day if he believes that he's not meeting up to his peers. He likes to run, but he can't run fast like them and he's not coordinated. Right? So unfortunately, another conversation that we need or another strategy that we can implement to try to break down some of these barriers is educating, psychoeducating, even at the level of the children. I have no problem coming to talk to the children about why he's different, why he cries so much, why he has meltdowns and he breaks down, or why he, in the middle of class, he does this thing called stimming. It is very annoying. And I'm not meaning to like make a chair at it. It is something that he does to calm himself when he is overstimulated. But for the persons around him who are not understanding, it can be very annoying. Like, why are you doing that? Right? So we are in a very unique time in our era where we have a lot of information, but possibly not enough finances to properly put in all of these systems that need to be in place to properly support all of the things that we are seeing. Because great systems, great systems, but on paper, because we need more manpower. But more manpower means more resources. And where we get it from?
That word empowerment, that is a very important word that we don't pay enough attention to. Two things. Parental empowerment, as you mentioned, very, very important. We have a WhatsApp group of about 280 parents of autistic children ranging from 2 years to 45 years old. And we give them that forum, that safe space to vent, to criticize everybody who not helping their children, to go on and on and on. But at the end of the day, we always encourage them to come back and support each other. So if you are having a problem with your child who is eating fries or eating pizza alone, and you need to get your child to expand their diet, then ask the other parents how they do it. Support each other, come up with ideas, share what your strategies are. And that has gone a long way in helping parents. That's the first one. The second one is, I see at the level of children in schools, from primary schools or even ECC centers, it's very, very important that we start teaching them about neurodiversity. So the children who attend sessions at Rams Clubhouse who are in schools, whether it's public or private schools, we encourage the parents to go and talk to the teachers, talk to the principals, have some kind of session in the school to explain why your child acts the way he does. What it is that he needs to support him. How can you approach him and be, a friend to him? And that is the level at which we need to start changing the whole mindset and empowering not just parents, but empowering children from a very, very young age. Those are the kind of strategies that mightn't cost anything. You just a parent going out to school and talking about your child and helping other children to understand. It doesn't really cost anything. But at the same time, it has a very deep impact, and those are the kind of things that we need to do more.
Thank you. I wanted
turn the conversation a little bit back to Shinelle, who would have shared with us that she was, late diagnosed. And to ask you, what are some of the support mechanisms that would have been put in place for you, and what have you been able to do in your own working environment to make it palatable for you to operate?
Yeah, I'll answer the latter half first. So I'm based here, I'm an employee here. I mean, anybody who has had the opportunity to go into my office space, you may realize it's a bit eclectic in nature. So I have my yoga mat there, I have my noise cancelling headphones present, I have multiple ones actually. And there are a lot of things that I had to develop intrinsically within a corporate space to function. Not sure if anybody from facilities may be here, but I tend to leave here about 7 or 8 because that's really when I get my quiet time to do any type of work after the weekday has ended. But for me, being a student abroad, it was truly eye-opening. The list of accommodations that would have been rolled out, it left me feeling a bit bittersweet. Happy that I was able to access these things, but very saddened by the reality that when I came back to Trinidad, I was fully cognizant of the fact that most of these things would not have been available. So I made a quick list. And these are very quick. These are some of the things that I would have had access to. And I'm speaking about it from the capacity of both being a student away, as well as when I was working at a university abroad. So I had that whole edition of the safe space, that was a mandatory thing. And in the work culture, there was also a room dedicated to that. It was a bookable space that we had access to, which meant that we scanned the QR code and we had 2 hours that we could have used totally in darkness or silence to decompress. We even had a quiet hour at gym and at the workplace as well. So different departments at the university I worked at, we dedicated probably, I think it was like 10 to 11 every day, no meetings were to be held, right? Just to ensure a certain sense of consistency without having that blackout space either. In terms of multiple modes of assessment, and this is where the design consideration comes into play. And I think out of everything that I experienced, this probably was the most beneficial to me as an educator. Learning that the traditional model we have in treating with how students are assessed, it's very problematic. Yeah, not everybody may be versed in terms of writing a 10 or 20 page report. That doesn't mean that they will comprehend the information. Yeah, and that to me is probably fundamentally one of the biggest and most challenging things that we would have to really think about strategically. How do we now reframe and reformat these things so that everybody truly has some type of equal standing with respect to how they can process tertiary education? And I think the last thing that was particularly useful to me was that whole idea of continuous access to faculty training and sensitization. At any point in time, you have the option of a dedicated phone number and hotline that you could call. You can request having one-on-one consultations. You can request if it is you're working in a particular project to have a specialist on board from the university jump in for a 30-minute call to provide that sense of sensitization willingly. And it was almost a 24/7 access period that we had. Yeah, so collectively, I felt safe. I felt very much like this wasn't a challenge that I had to do independently. And that sense of community, even though to a large extent it existed in a virtual abstract way, at no point in time was it a sense of pressure for me to have conversations openly about this.
And we've heard this word training maybe a couple of times across the discussion. What training do you think is needed at this point for us to be able to move not just the discussion, but our perception, policies as it pertains to neurodiversity? What type of training do you think is needed? And this is open to.
Alright, so when the foundation was started, the foundation is about 2 years old now. And we started back in talent. So when we started talking about neurodiversity, we got this blank look from those people. Right? So when we started talking about autism, we said, oh, right, now we want that. The training starts with awareness. A lot of people do not know what it is. They do not have an understanding. And even if they do, it's probably incorrect. So we have to start with, at the very base level, understanding what neurodiversity is, what things like autism are, how they present, so that people have a clear understanding of what it looks like. Starting, and then from there, we start talking about, well, in your space, what does that mean? So in the school space, how does that present? In the workplace, how does that present? At home, how does that present? And then there's the practical aspect of, okay, this is how it presents. These are the things that can work. These are the things that you can do. That's one side. Part of the training has to be access to assessment. So another big part of the problem is if you are doing it privately, it is very expensive. If you want to get tested for ADHD or autism, to run you between $5,000 to $8,000 for the assessment. And it's not even just a Trinidad thing. So I have one of my colleagues who's in the UK. I asked her to see how much does it cost to get an autism diagnosis? £3,000. I said, okay, thank you. I won't be asking that question. So the awareness, the training is great, but we also have to have this name that, okay, now that I know, how can I access specific help for myself, for my family member, for somebody else I know, in a way that is accessible. And then it's say, no, well, that's going to a therapist or with a psychiatrist. Although I think at some level that is being put on a bit now. But the training is going to raise that level of awareness, and then you're going to have this pool of people coming and want to be assessed. And you need to be able to deal with that because it's going to be a really, really good thing.
Yeah. So, if I may add briefly, I think in addition to understanding what constitutes neurodiversity, there's also the question that occurs, which is what next? And I think also that itself is a big knowledge gap. A lot of people don't know what accommodations exist, where to start looking for it, how are these things accessed, financially speaking, can they afford access to these things? So sensitization to me kind of goes a bit dually in that sense. Understanding, going through the assessment, and therefore having access to these are the things that could possibly help and contribute to an improved lifestyle thereafter. And sensitization at that core is also important. I very much think that we can help more people, encourage more people to get diagnosed if they understand in a very tangible sense, these are the things that can help you, and these are the things that are available.
So I think we've done, well, the panelists have done a really good job at lightly wetting your palate on the topic of neurodiversity. And I want to sort of partially close the panel side of the discussion to give members of the audience an opportunity to ask any questions to any one of the panelists that may be of interest to you.
I don't think I need a mic. Right, so I don't think I need a
voice.
Yes, I can. So my question is, and maybe Shinelle or Radica may be able to answer this. What would you say is corporate Trinidad and Tobago's responsibility when it comes to supporting the Ministry of Education, supporting social services, supporting initiatives of the private public schools? What would be the model, Radica? What would be the model that we would want to see, that we could put forward probably, so that we can incorporate corporate Trinidad and Tobago?
So I can only talk from the side of my NGO support autism TMT. One of the things that I mentioned it earlier, it was mentioned within the panel earlier as well, is that whole concept of employing adults, not neurodiverse adults. And one of the ways in which corporate Trinidad can really assist is by putting things in place to employ adults with differences, with generally across the board, whether it's ADHD or it's autism or it's dyslexia or whatever we're talking about. I think that they could play a big role in bridging that gap. And recently I did a sensitization session with 2 companies actually, and those 2 things that we put forward to them. That listen, we are here to educate you all about autism and to tell you about autism, but that is not enough. We don't want you to just be aware, because being aware is not helping the neurodiverse community in any way. We want you to now put things in place to support your employees with neurodiversities, to support parents of children with different challenges. And more importantly, we want you to start putting things in place to employ our autistic adults or adults with Down syndrome and so on. Because at the end of the day, we cannot depend on government alone to do it. Everyone has to play a role, whether it is government, corporate entities, businesses, NGOs, individuals. So we want corporate Trinidad and Tobago to come on board and support us. In case of my NGO, I would beg them to come on board and support us at our fundraising, because as an NGO at Running Rams Clubhouse, we have a long wait list of children who we simply cannot accommodate, 1, because of space, and 2, because of facilitators. We don't have enough facilitators. But for us to expand our model, we need that kind of funding. At the same time, to be fair to corporate Trinidad, I must mention that recently we did a massive fundraiser. It was an Autism 5K charity walk. We catered for 1,000 people, and companies like MGC, Republic Bank, Extra Foods, they all sponsored their employees to come and participate in these kind of events. And in that way, they are building team spirit, and they are building that sense of collaboration amongst the employees, but at the same time, they are supporting worthy causes. So it is something that we need them to come on board at different levels. And I think once they are aware of what they can do, they will be more open to fulfilling their responsibilities.
Right. I'll be very brief. So I would go and say funding. I would like to see corporate Trinidad have a more invested approach partnering with higher education institutions from the standpoint of collaboratively doing things like research, which is necessary within our space. I would like to see contributions being made in terms of corporate Trinidad, possibly working with higher ed and sponsoring or contributing to different things. Software, for example, could be very inclusive and very expensive. And this is something that the average higher ed institution may not readily have access to. So in that regard, I think probably going on the road of having a BP safe space, for example, where these employees even can have access to vital resources to assist would be necessary. And my final point on this is that training, I think, is something that's very accessible. Having people who are specialists within these areas coming into higher ed, doing guest lectures, having that level of sensitization at a much broader organizational level, it only leads to a lot of benefits trickle downwards.
I'm sorry, it's all right. This comes out you people understand when it comes to corporate the label, corporate anyway, they like to look good in public domain. I'm not saying that they have nothing directly, but if they can look good,
And get a tax.
you have to be able to make that name. You want to have a fundraiser, you want to have a like key, how can it? This fit in, right? And then that's it all. So you might send 5 employees, you might send 10. But while you're here, I could come and talk to yourself, but while you're here, you think you might want to sponsor some of my people to go on training, and you just open that door. But you have to be able to market it. It's not just about you giving me money to do something. How can I help you with your corporate goals of looking good? And manage that relationship, and it's not everything. I think some of that, I have some skill, but I have seen it good. And you will see that there are some entities and NGOs that get a lot in terms of corporate assistance. And while some of us, now starting to develop, you actually can see that's what I'm talking about. do I able to make that value of the class, like if you partner with us, you will look at it. And personal average application, and you will reach exceptional value.
Any other questions?
Okay, the question is for the ladies on the camp. The beautiful ladies on the camp. I have a two-part question. So I'm wearing two hats. I'm wearing the hat of an emergent teacher, and I'm wearing the hat of a parent. In regards to children with neurological differences, I experienced as a parent the difficulties that ensued in trying to get my child enrolled in a preschool. So I'm just going to give you a brief story. I went to 5 different preschools, started school. The obvious, why is she not staying still? Why is she wetting herself, throwing water on herself because she had sensory for liquids? And put out. And it went down to the fact where I had to call the ministry and basically kind of ask, is there any assistance that I can get to get her into a school? They told me to bring her. I got her into a school. But then when I got to the school, there we presented another challenge. The teachers were the same. They were like, I deal with this. Come for her every day. Come for her early. Come, so on that part, what could we as educators or persons that have the influence in terms of the ministry part, do to help parents understand the challenges that they would have to face, because there are challenges as much as we would want to see, just go out there and get your child diagnosed and it should be fine. They are going to find challenges to support them. And then on the teacher side of it, I've worked in schools, and the other part is getting the parents to understand that we are identifying something that needs to be addressed. And that is a very, very big barrier, because I'm seeing my little precious 3-year-old or my little precious 4-year-old, and you are saying to me, something might be wrong. They are not accepting that. So there is no early intervention. And if that is not happening, when they don't get that at that age, and then they matriculate over into primary school, it's another major challenge, because the primary school is not accommodating some of the things that, like I sent her to the early childhood centers, where they would have these different stations, and she was allowed to move around because she wasn't into the sit down and ride. And then they get to primary school and it's sit down and only. So then we have a back and forth that seems to be very, very challenging for both the teachers as well as for the parents.
Yes, I empathize with you as a parent. That can be very challenging,
Yes.
right? Transitions. And of course, as you say, to see a little one navigate through this, it could be a handful. All right. And yes, at the Ministry of Education, once a child goes into the primary school, I can tell you, as I mentioned, the child will be detected, referrals will be done, interventions, hopefully will start, but it's not going to be smooth here. The timeline is not going to be there. That is why you have school social workers who work with the parents, provide that psychoeducation, and begin to advocate for this child, be that voice for that child. The school social worker will help mommy, daddy, their family, through family intervention, begin to tap into other sources of support. So the community mobilization starts now. So here's what we're not getting into the school level. Okay, where can we get the support now? And they will start to assist you with writing letters. All right, we would have assisted many parents to get good to UEP, UEP, and UEP sponsor them. And UEP got the assistance for that based on school social workers assisting the parent to writing letters. Because some parents don't have the literacy skills to begin to advocate for themselves and their child. So there's where we found it very important. You mentioned denial of certain parents and shame and stigma coming into play when it comes to accessing services. And yes, it will take some time. There are many factors and many cultural issues that parents undergo from time to time to really get to that place. I can tell you, when I found that my child was diagnosed, it took me a good while. Like, this space, And I felt I was excluded immediately. I felt excluded from society. There's no walls around me, but I felt excluded. And you begin to now figure out how can I go through this process. So I'm telling you, the Ministry of Education, not all schools will be the same. All right, all schools will be the same. We have private and public schools. You cannot access. There is grants, access through social welfare that will pay for the child. The Ministry of Education, we also have a special needs grant we provide on our end, where you can come to us with a diagnosis and we can provide funding for that child who's already in the system. So there are services, but again, I can only speak as social work from a social perspective. You really would need someone to kind of hold your hand and walk you through that support system, because it's a new realm for you. You don't really know how to navigate through all those structural issues. Bureaucracy is big in there, and you're gonna have to get someone who kind of understand the nitty-gritties to get around it, so your child can get the best support. And yes, we have preschoolers. We would use the word expel, but they get them put out, right? From the o'clock, and it's hard to say.
Oh my God, that's 15 now, so that was,
Good.
it was quite a while then.
I think in the aspect of teachers, supporting parents by saying, hey, this is something's here. I think it's recognizing the free word. Again, wording is important. If you come and say something wrong with your child, immediately there's going to be a wall that is put up. Because as a new parent myself, you see all this moment, you see all of the possibilities of what this child will become. And immediately somebody saying something wrong with your child, immediately is you immediately feel the crushing of every dream, every thought, not knowing that those dreams that you have are still a possibility, but immediately you just feel like your world has been crushed. So understanding wording is as basic as it is. Wording, saying, I think we need to figure out how we're going to support or figure out what systems we need to put in place in order to allow this child to reach their goals. We want to see them reach their goals, and we believe they have the potential to reach their goals. But I'm not too sure if we have enough systems in place. I need to understand what systems we need to have in place. We've tried this method. And I'm not too sure what other methods that need to be implemented. I think we need to bring another specialist on board. So phrasing it like that immediately allows a parent to understand, wait, there is still hope. We just need to figure out which route we're going to get to there. So in terms of just at the base, recognizing as well as there's some teachers who have this is a problem child. And their reality is they are really teachers that don't like children or don't like this specific child. And they actually put barriers for that child in terms of how they address the child. The child, as simple as you forgot your pencil, and they make it a point to embarrass the child rather than supporting the child. And that's just the reality of what you're not dealing with teachers, all teachers who love children, who want to support children, who see children for their uniqueness and figuring out how can I support them. So recognizing that, yes, as teachers, that's also, as a parent, that's also a factor. But in terms of training, addressing parents and telling them, listen, if you need to address a parent on a style or learning or the level of support that you think needs to be implemented, the framework in which you do that, saying, how can we support? And this is what we need to support, as opposed to you're doing something wrong and this, and you have a problem. And you are the problem. Because as a parent, that's what you would hate. You are the problem. But you don't want to, framework is what you want to have at base to address that.
Right. We have a couple questions from our online listeners. One of the questions would be, I would like to hear more about some programs that currently exist within schools to support neurodiverse children and young people. So Chevon, I know that question is directed at you. I know you've spoken about one of the schools and one of the things that they've done, but perhaps you can shed some light on some other programs that may be available.
All right, so what parents can do on the Ministry of Education website, on the division, you'll see student support services, and then you will click on that. And then we go down to student support services, you'll see all the different units we have. And you go under the special education unit or our DEIU, which is diagnostic, assessment and intervention unit. And there you will see a list of resources that we will put frequently, various columns, various articles, and also up-to-date programs that we collaborate with to provide support for parents. So it's there, it's readily available. I know sometimes it's hard to navigate, but it's there. But in general, we have the referral system in place to have the child receive intervention from the specialists, clinical psychologists, school social workers, school psychologists, behavioral specialists, and guidance counselors. And of course, guidance counselors go into the classroom and create awareness. They do universal engagement. So they go into all levels of primary and secondary, and they address the classroom. Social workers are more targeted, but guidance officers are there educating the classroom all the time. So therefore, parents have the opportunity to walk in and meet with a guidance officer, SSC personnel who's there, who can then provide additional support for them and guide them where they need to go. So it's there, and you could always visit the school, speak to the principal if the child is not enrolled in school, visit your educational district school supervisors there, and let the school supervisor know that you would like to get some support for your child in this area, and the school supervisor will direct you, and that's their duty, and we do have a duty of care.
Thank you very much. And Monique, who is joining us online, I think that would answer your question as well. Yeah. Do we have any other questions from the?
No, that's all right. I can project.
What do you might needed for this?
Good morning. I'm wearing two hats. I'm an employee of COSTAATT, but I'm also the PR for the Trinidad and Tobago Association for Parent Care. And one of our projects is to have a early childhood center for children with hearing issues, which will also obviously encompass a lot of what you're talking about. Now, I see you as a very powerful group up there, but what I also see is silos in terms of everyone is almost separate. And one of the things that I believe is extremely important is data. The government is only going to respond to data. What is the data saying of how much people are neurodivergent? Now, this is just anecdotal, but based on my experience as a lecturer, and of course yours as well, from what I'm hearing, a lot more people are neurodivergent than we suspect, than we would, than we would look at and say, everybody neurotypical. No, I think a lot more are neurodivergent. What mechanisms can we put in place in order to get data so that we can then say, okay, out of 100 or 1,000 people, these are the amount of people that are affected by being neurodivergent, and therefore this is the amount of resources we need to dedicate towards that. I think that is an extremely important part of it that perhaps we're not tackling, because as I said, you're very powerful. You could literally be the council of languages of Trinidad and Tobago out there. But how do you now affect change by the use of data?
So you're very correct. One of the pillars of the Neurodiversity Foundation is actually research. And we recognize exactly what you just said. So even the PhD I'm doing, and the reason why I'm doing it is specifically for that purpose. So within the foundation, we have people specializing in specific areas. So we have the clinical, we have the school, and I am Greaves. So for myself, in my cycle, I am doing specific research with regards to the neurodiversity within the workplace in Trinidad and Tobago. That is my research that I'll be working on for the next few years. And again, the aim is to provide that information, that data, and that will fuel policy, that will fuel government, and so on and so forth. And I think that is part of what is important. So putting the data in place, having those conversations, but more importantly, having people who are willing to kind of make that commitment because it's our role. And like I said, different people are doing different things. So even having this conversation with us, having a conversation for a couple of years about having things like this, where we can start having a conversation, start meeting each other, start making the linkages, sharing information. This is a wonderful way to start. So to be very specific, there are people, myself included, who are actively looking at these to start having those conversations. But even our ability to have this type of forum, our community,
No, but not yet. I mean,
Maybe next week.
I'm sure this was part of the agenda. This is a discussion that was happening prior to this, along with this will myself. Looking at the best phase of this really heavily relying on that type of proposal to give policy to give institutional change. It's something that has to happen, and I agree. I don't think at this stage, especially in Trinidad, where the whole discussion, I would say, is still very much in a place of infancy, that we should jump on boards into rolling out recommendations. We need to get cultural context. We need to get data that's really tailored to the respective demographics that we're looking at. I guess it will be higher. Benchmarking is also really significant. And to go back to what I was recommending, and Sherry asked a question, I think this is really the gap where we need to get that type of funding to propel that type of research. Working hand in hand with entities for funding to have designated teams on the ground, collecting, doing that sensitization, doing that analysis, then reaching to a place where we can roll out these recommendations in a meaningful way.
So I keep hearing about the interaction with teachers and neurodiverse students, child and parents. But what about the interaction with diverse child and their parents? Because sometimes I think that could probably come for bullying in the schools, because when you're seeing as different, you find that children down up and you call you stupid, and that also sends a child into a state of depression, low self-esteem, and then that makes it even worse. So now you not only have a child dealing with neurodiversity, but now they're dealing with self-esteem issues. Now they're dealing with learning challenges besides what they already suffer with. So I think the conversation is not only about the adult interaction with the children, but also their interaction at the various levels in the secondary schools, the primary schools, and even peer-to-peer at the workplace. So that was what I was just listening and realizing that that gap is there, right? And no one seems to be really addressing the peer-to-peer gap in the schools that will cause problems, other problems that arise.
If I may add, interestingly, there's I think it's an Australian-based NGO with worldwide linkages at this point, and they've recently entered into the Caribbean space. What you're talking about is exactly what they are working on right now. I'm trying to get some additional information to circulate to persons registered, but they are teaching empathy at the ECC level. And they're specifically looking at centers where they feel as if they're diverse groups and having trained personnel come in to do sensitization at the ECC level. So I know recently they've just done a whole campaign within New York. I think they just launched in Belize recently, and they're making their way through all the Caribbean region doing that type of targeting. It is not beyond me to think that very soon that request will come to us in Trinidad and Tobago to open up ourselves to that type of discussion and exposure. And when it does, I truly hope that's an opportunity where the Ministry of Education may be able to collaborate with this NGO just to kind of foster that type of conversation.
So my question is actually on Chevon. Because so in 2015, I was started secondary school, I was in Form 1, right? And I would have been the same thing that you started on this discussion with. it's only one guidance counselor for like 4 or 5 different schools, and it's been a problem since back then. I mean, we're in 2025 now, right? And it's still a problem. Is it the fact, okay, so let me go on to be a bit personal as well, right? So I have an autism organization as well, and we started the same 10 years. You can see the impact and the way that we've done in those 10 years and so on. But is it that the Ministry of Education doesn't have anything in place like monitoring and evaluation to hear from people like you who are actually out there in the field, to give the recommendations as to we need more people out there? Is it that you don't have those types of meetings, or is it that you're just so focused on looking good that you don't want to work on these things behind the scenes? Which really crossed my mind.
Good job.
Above your pay grade.
Yes. I should be getting paid by after lunch today. That is there. In terms of us, we again, Ministry of Education implemented student support services years ago. All right, 2004 school social work would have been piloted and as a pilot project, and we're still up. And it's not because, and it's awesome because Shinelle mentioned that. It's really important that research and data is gathered properly and it's provided to the necessary ends. We have the issue, of course, we have different issues politically that we have to encounter. We have sometimes, as my manager is Dr. Nneka St, and she recently appointed. However, we have managers that change pretty quickly. All right, because again, we're in the public sector domain. Sometimes there are a lot of bureaucracy. I remember we were advocating for something, and as soon as we were going to get it, the PS changed. So we went back down to have to start over to now lobby for this change. So outside of us wanting more guidance officers, look, right now, interviews happened last week for guidance, social work, and special educators. The ad is out now for social work specialists, diagnosis specialists. Come Monday, we're not sure what's going to happen, if things change or how it changes. So therefore, we have to also be in mind the wider society of things. But the core of it, and it's been the voice of many, we really need to staff this unit better. And to me, there's been a growth as we expanded because we started mediation, restorative practices has been started, different data collected, implemented mentorship programs, other programs for the said unit to expand and more, because we have started a remediation program where there's one-to-one in selected schools. 81 primary schools and 27 secondary schools in Trinidad and Tobago has one-to-one ratio. That started in 2022 post-COVID. And this coming out of data and policy, we got that program approved and cabinet note approved and funded. Yes, funded to have these programs. So, and again, once data shows that as a result of this one-to-one ratio in these selected schools, we saw an improvement in behavioral change and social interactions, then therefore the ministry will implement now this to happen throughout the country and then the staffing. So there has been some improvements, but there's a far long way to go. All right, thank you, dear.
I wanna thank, I wanna end a little, we have a question. Okay, if we take one last question.
Hi, good afternoon. I'll preface my question with a couple of comments. My first comment is really to commend the organizers of this forum to have a discussion like that, like this very important discussion. I am a professional, I'm a clinician who deals exclusively with persons with invisible and visible disabilities across the board, primarily in the pediatric domain, but also across the board with various types of disabilities. And a question that's burning in my mind is a forum like this, where do we go from here to be able to effect change at a national level? I'll leave that as an open-ended question, but a comment that I'd like to make is I would like to suggest that any moves forward require clarity in data collection, what we exactly want to collect, being very clear on definitions to drive the data collection and then monitoring whatever changes are made and to come up with some way of erasing the deep barriers between the silos, because the Ministry of Education functions in their domain, the Ministry of Health functions in their domain. To a large extent, corporate Trinidad may or may not be able to penetrate between the various silos. So that it's very challenging, but it's necessary for this multidisciplinary approach to managing issues related to any type of disability. So I would just, make those few comments, but my main question at this time, because I know we're past the time to end, is where do we go from here? We've identified a whole number of challenges and some solutions, but where do we go from here?
Thank you for that question. I think when this idea was conceptualized, that was to the core of my mind. We have a lot of these things, and the more exposed you are to this particular niche, you realize there are a bunch of workshops going on, and then we leave and we have our tea plate or our bottle of water, and then we just kind of dwell on the couple of things and it becomes nothing. So one of the things coming out of this as an actionable item is really starting to do some preliminary research. And speaking from the perspective of COSTAATT, because we are starting on a micro level, understanding what those needs may be within our institution. Yeah, and having that focus really gives us a platform to have a foundation for the discussion. We are also toying with the idea of generating an annual calendar of events, which really will be breaking apart the different elements of neurodiversity. Because we realize as well, it should not be dealt with using a broad brush approach. Yeah, so we're going to drill down looking at the specifics. We may have a session, for example, understanding dyslexia, understanding dyspraxia, dyscalculia. So looking at the various aspects of this and the fundamental, what are the approaches, how can accommodations be made for these specific things. I feel as much as this is an introductory session, it's a sensitization. The aim really is that we walk away with tangible insights and tangible things that we can implement to help specific people moving forward. And I think very realistically speaking, the financial constraints are real. The resource limitations are very real. But I'm also here to say that I think there are lots of things that can in fact be implemented, where it relates to changing of mindsets, knowledge sharing, accommodations in terms of design that can lend to a lot of support in very meaningful ways. And those are the things that I think are close, easy reaching fruit to our large extent. So look out to see, I think once it is we meet, and of course I have to clear this with the powers that be at COSTAATT. But once we have in fact listed out what our strategic approaches regarding similar sessions like this, and we hope that will all be willing to attend and contribute. The intention is to create a space of community for this type of sharing. Drawing on the expertise, knowledge, drawing on people with personal experiences, understanding the needs of the various demographics that we serve, whether it be teacher training, whether it be support for parents and them understanding how to deal with it, whether it be from understanding the perspective of educators who need to reframe and reimagine how instruction should take place to be more inclusive. So on our end, on the institutional side, these are the things that we're looking forward to.
Thank you for that, Shinelle. So I hope that answers your what now question, because as Shinelle said, that is the question that we started our discussions about this initiative with, right? So it's not just a one and done and we move on and continue on with our daily lives. I do want to end a little bit differently by asking each of the panelists to leave us with a brief nugget, I'm calling it a nugget, on neurodiversity that you want the audience to take on. Yeah? In no particular order.
You're hurting my thumb. Very briefly, I would say, as somebody who is an educator, an administrator, and a neurodivergent person, and a caretaker of a neurodivergent who do, we need to really challenge these thought process that this is something wrong with you. That in itself is where it begins. We need to understand that yes, things may be different and there are different approaches that you need to possibly adopt to make life a little bit more palatable. But this whole notion that neurodiversity means something is wrong with you, that is the initial thing I'd like everybody to hopefully hear. Nothing is wrong with you.
I was just going to say it's okay to be different for neurodiverse persons. Don't think that you wear and you don't think that you're weird and you compare yourself to others and you try to be like others. It's okay to be yourself. It's okay to be different. At the end of the day, we have to question what is normal and what is abnormal. And that's the most important thing that we can do.
Around your room. Recognize an important stakeholder in the sector. Who has seen it? No, men. It comes very few men inside there. Men are also neurodivergent. This is not a woman's issue. So we need to start broadening this conversation, having that conversation with men in our lives. And then here, because this affects all of us, and it's definitely requires a partnership. All right, so we need more men in these conversations, having these conversations that I'm telling you. We would like to talk much about issues that we're having, but every issue that we've spoken about affects men as well. And we need to start opening that conversation, space again, for them to start feeling safe and having that conversation with us.
So we've spoken a lot about neurodiversity today, and one of the things that we didn't particularly touch on it, but we examined, how it presents. And one of the things I want you all to know is that even though you're going to learn a lot about the fact that it looks this way and there are these symptoms and whatever, no two neurodivergent people are the same, even if they have the same diagnosis. So, for the neurodivergent people who may be listening to this, I want to tell them to find their superpower. I wish that my son was here. I was happy to hear one of our audience members talk about the fact that bullying could be a spin-off when children are not understanding about what makes their peers different from them. And every morning before my son goes to school, I always say to him, remember, this is not a problem. This is not a disorder or disability or, this is not a deficit. This is your superpower.
Thank you all. As a social worker, I'm speaking on taking that lens that it's systemic. Many systems impact the child and impact the person who is neurodivergent. And it's important for us to understand how everything interplays and provide support. Be kind wherever you are. If you're interacting with that person at the system of the workplace, at the system of your religious organization, the system at the community level, at the system of the home, the system of the school, wherever you go, be kind, because this person is interacting with layers of systems every day, and this person has to now find strategies to navigate. So wherever you meet them, on the side of the road, you should be kind to everyone, because we don't know what they are experiencing, what they are going through, and they are experiencing many challenges. Don't be quick to judge. Don't be quick to interrupt. Don't be quick to come to assumptions. Have that non-judgmental approach to persons who interact, so we can be kind and be empathic around everyone. And that lens, put on that nuclear lens, that I will be kind in whatever space I'm at with this person I interact with. It's inclusion.
I think what we need to understand is that at the core of everything is understanding. And wording, I feel like wording plays a huge role in people's wanting to even step foot into this role or step foot into understanding. So in terms of evaluations, I won't even use the word diagnosis. I say just the basis of I want to understand how this brain works so that we can figure out the level of resources that are needed for this particular brain. I think in terms of recognizing that, yes, we can't run away from labels because just as I said, labels help me or help us to have a basis of the way we can stand. So labels are not the bad guy. Just like understanding headaches and Panadol, as I said earlier, headache versus tumor, understanding labels allow for treatments. So you can't say, I don't want my child to get labeled. We just want to have a basis of understanding so that we can then have proper treatment. So that the child will then be able to have all of the resources that they need to reach whatever goals that they want. Or even in some cases, for some parents to realize, okay, we may have planted the seed that this child is going to be X, Y, and Z. And recognizing, well, that's, if you're investing in your own lane, this is really where their strengths are. Let's invest in him and figure out what systems in place we can import. We can plan for them so that they can shine. The reality is, as I was saying, that we still have a model of, yeah, they're going to be a lawyer, doctor, teacher. And not recognizing that in reality, in order for this whole society to function, there are giftings all around. And as a parent, you really want to invest in your child in their particular strength, not necessarily you need to do X, Y, and Z to be successful. So even a reframework of what does success look like, a reframing of what does giftedness look like, what do strengths look like, it's not a case of we can say, this is, anybody can tell me that, you can tell me one thing that can do to fix the whole process. I would say you missed something because there's a lot of different things and perspectives that need to work together in order for us as a society to evolve.
Thank you. Nneka, I have to say this, hats off to you, to Shinelle, to your team, to the podium. This was excellent. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Cumberbatch. I do want to first say on behalf of the Departments of Education and Social and Behavioural Sciences, and specifically the very small team that put this together, Miss Wills, who is at the back, very silent, Shinelle and myself started with a simple conversation that led us to this day, and I'm extremely grateful and appreciative to firstly to the panelists who have given of their time and of their expertise and have really spoken to us about both their professional and personal experiences with neurodiversity. And this would not be the last, as I said, this is the first of many to come. I also want to thank our audience, our listening audience, and our viewing audience as well. And I really hope that you leave here today with something. Is it a better understanding of neurodiversity? Is it an understanding of strategies that you can apply? I'm really hoping and I'm positive that every person in this room and online is going to be leaving with something. Before you run out, for those of us who are here in person, our very own COSTAATT students, we've spoken about strategies, we've spoken about things that can be done and applied, led by the lecturer, Miss Akal, has a display in the corner to it would be to my left, right? I'm asking if you can please visit. The students have worked really hard on it. It is the students of the ECCE 320 Instructional Strategies for Students with Disabilities. So please take some time to go and view and chat with the students so they can tell you a little bit about their display items. Yeah, so thank you again. Everyone be safe and do have an enjoyable weekend ahead.